Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the people of the Wiiwurrung and Boorong language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. I respectfully acknowledge their ancestors and elders, past and present, and also the future. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. Thank you so much. So for a bit of fun, thought we'd get us warmed up. So panel, one big question for you. Are you team Zoom or are you team Teams? What is your preferred platform and why?
Zoom.
Who wants to go?
Team Zoom.
I joined Jackie as a Mac user. Team Zoom is my go-to.
That's right.
Team
also Mac user.
I was going to say, Tenielle, I think we know where you stand. Team Teams. Fantastic. Look, I might kick off. Look, in our latest report, the OfficeClash, we revealed that flexibility for employees is actually in the top 3 considerations when they're thinking about leaving or staying in a job. Jackie, I might throw this one to you, but what are you currently doing within your organisations, or what have you been seeing other businesses do to really help address the need for more flexibility with employees and also retaining staff?
Sure. So I think, I guess the concept of flexibility at work, isn't really a recent, theme. I think the pandemic has accelerated, I guess, some of the progress that we would like to see in terms of flexibility and how that shows up, and even, I guess, sort of access to that flexibility for more people. But I think it's important to acknowledge that, we were on a bit of a quest for more flexibility before COVID even happened. And so at REA in particular, we had a flex policy, and, we were really trying to sort of make the opportunity for employees to, I guess, raise, questions around flexibility with their leader, something that they felt that they could navigate with a bit of structure, as well as sort of, what some considerations for what flex could look like in terms of role design or hours of working, days of working, location of working. So we had already made, I guess, some progress, but I think, like many other industries, like many other organizations, the pandemic has afforded us that opportunity to sort of bring flexibility to, the top of the list in terms of some of the things that we want to focus on from an employee experience point of view. And so, effectively, what I think we've done quite well as an organisation, in recent years, is really just focus on being a bit more curious with our employees as to, okay, now what does flexibility look like for you? Because we don't want to assume that it might be, made up of, the same considerations, that for everybody. So when I talk about that curiosity, I guess it's around how have we put, mechanisms in place for employees to express their views around that? What have been the forums where we could listen to, what's important to them? And so we've really tried to, I guess, come up with a number of different channels or mechanisms of where we can gather that insight for the benefit then of thinking about what some, options for greater flexibility could look like. So that can show up in the form of, employee surveys. That can show up in the form of, team interactions that are facilitated. Policies are obviously important, but we've really tried to, I guess, use it as an opportunity to listen, because I think the pace at which, the external narrative around flexibility and future of work is progressing, that for it not to be a priority for any organisation is probably something that they would need to look at if it isn't right now. So absolutely listening to our employees and working with our leaders to sort of understand the themes that are coming out of what flex on a go forward basis looks like.
That's so interesting, because I think when we looked at the report, one of the things that actually came out was that the management level actually places less importance on flexibility. So employees wanted to stay hybrid, but actually managers were really wanting them to come back into the office. Tenielle, just for you on this one, what do you think business can do to help address that kind of tension between employees' definition of flexibility and kind of potentially managers and leaders' definition of it?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, particularly as we began the COVID a couple of years ago, and as we've kind of morphed out of it and we're kind of all coming back to the office, that kind of convergence of what managers expect and what employees are wanting is definitely something that we're seeing within our organisation, and I'm seeing it in a lot of my clients. And what's interesting, I guess, on a qualitative level is it's not that managers are placing less importance on flexibility. It's more that I think they're wanting to bring people back from a collaboration perspective, that how do we get the most out of our people when we do have them in the offices. So there's a few things that we've seen. If you think around flexibility frameworks, within Accenture, we really do have a hybrid model, and it's very much based on, you know, employees can work where they want, when they want, with those overlays of where our clients are working and where our clients would like us to work and where we need to come together. There definitely is a component of prioritization when you bring people back together, why you bring them back together, so that you get the biggest benefit out of the time of people coming back into the office, of commuting. What I have seen some clients do is, and I've done this with my team actually, is a bit of a survey on what is the best day for us to all be in the office. It doesn't need to be every day, but let's vote. So it's not because as we said, a lot of people want hybrid working. Managers want people back in the office. So how do we get that interaction of, well, I feel like I've had a say in when I'm coming back, because I want to be hybrid is actually hybrid, right? Being in the office and being at home. But as an employee, I want to do that on my terms, on the days that work for me, around, you know, what happens in my personal life and everything else. So they want a little bit of a say on the days they come back into the office. But you might have a big team. So how do you get a bit of a vote going on the days that you return? What are you going to do on those days? It's super important that as you plan for flexible frameworks and hybrid working, that the days people come in, they're not sitting on these team meetings and Zoom, but they are, you know, building those relationships, getting incidental learning by observing what's happening in the workplace, and collaborating. Going into the office and sitting on a Zoom call or a Teams call for 8 hours a day is not, you know, you're not getting the benefit or productivity we'd be looking for when we bring people back into the office. So I think it is absolutely about listening. So Jackie spoke about employee listening. I think when we look at designing for kind of the flex frameworks, it's also about flex policies. We see some organizations going as far as work anywhere, anytime, right? How does that play out from a hybrid perspective? Design jobs around hybrid working from a productivity perspective. What are the tasks people can do at home? And they can be more productive without distractions of an office. And where do we get the most benefit? Like when we collaborate, when we need rapid decision making, they're the things that we need to come together for, and we can actually kind of accelerate a lot of our work when we think about compressed transformation and things like that.
Yeah, and that's really echoed in that research that we did around the reasons for going back into the office are really, you know, the foundation is around that collaboration, that social contact, and almost that exchanging of ideas that kind of comes a little bit more naturally as you're in that kind of environment. Excuse me. Adrian, anything from you on that you're seeing in your work?
Yeah, well, really, if I was to sort of boil it down to something that we can take away, we are looking to create a win-win on lots of different levels. And in win-win, there's naturally going to be some coordination, some cooperation that's needed, and sometimes some compromise and negotiation. So I think the curiosity that Jackie spoke so beautifully about, and then understanding, well, how do we actually bring that to life when we have listened and we understand it? What does this look like? And where there can be tensions is that, you know, historically for most people, the default where there was a level of certainty was, I go to the office to work. And when that was essentially blown up, we don't have that same sense of certainty, and it's caused a shift in perspective. Well, how can I actually look at, approach, and relate to my experience of work and life differently into the future? So where I think some of the tension can be coming from is trying to understand, well, what does this win-win actually look like in reality now that there isn't the same type of certainty that we had before? What does flexibility look like when inherently flexibility is about something that's dynamic? So what we essentially have changed is a sense of certainty to now the need to be quite open to how different this could be. And leaders, I'm sure, would be hungry for, what are the things that I can set as a framework or as structures where there is some certainty, where people can have clarity around how I do this work-life dynamic, or this office and home office type dynamic as well. But in all of these different lenses on the puzzle, there are, you know, needs to look at, well, what does a win-win ultimately look like on balance over time, not assuming that we find a perfect balance and it's a set and forget phenomena. That is an unlikely and unrealistic expectation.
Yeah.
Very true. Look, we're going to go into our first poll, which is around how much flexibility do you have at work? And are you happy with the company's current working model? And so there's a couple of options which I will get our audience to respond on. While they're doing that, Adrian, back to you. I mean, we talked about kind of, you know, the impact of hybrid work, but what is the impact of hybrid work on company culture? And do we kind of lose things, like I was saying before, around collaboration by going in this hybrid world? Or do we need to kind of accept that that's here and that actually there's new ways of doing the same things that we were used to doing pre the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, just really quickly, I'll provide a really annoying answer to that. And the point I'm going to make is that there are pros and cons to both. And I think that's where we actually need to be curious, to Jackie's point. What channel and what types of tools can we use in that channel that will be really helpful, thoughtful, and allow a level of productivity or collaboration that serves different kinds of objectives? And then on the flip side, well, what would an alternative look like? How could we capitalize on a work from home or a remote dial-in model for certain objectives as well? And then we can understand, well, what is the trade-off? What are the compromises? And what best suits the objectives that we have? The challenge, and why this can be a bit of an annoying answer, is, yeah, there isn't one thing that we will set with certainty. And as a result, this creates more work. We need to actually work at being thoughtful and prepared and preparing ourselves and others for how we want a particular type of work to be undertaken, setting expectations, creating a level of buy-in. And so it can feel, until we get proficient at it through this transition phase, that we've got more work on top of an already very full work schedule, is my understanding.
And so, I mean, I guess then what are some of the strategies, and Jackie, I'll ask you this one, that maybe REA Group have developed on how you manage this hybrid working at REA?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, we talk a lot about the poll results have just popped up.
Yeah,
I'm having a quick look at those. We talk a lot about, obviously, you know, being curious with our employees around, you know, what is it that they're seeking, you know, in a hybrid context, but also in terms of what does flexibility actually mean. But I think the other consideration to that is, you know, the focus that we need to put on our leaders to actually, how do they be curious? How do they explore that? How do they actually consider those things? And I think, you know, one of the things that we talk about a lot is, the role of a leader has never been more complex, because of all of these factors. And, so whilst we are, investing in strategies that are about sort of listening to our employee base, we're also investing in the sort of, I guess, capability build of our leaders so that they can, develop at pace, if you like, around all of these sort of, I guess, additional themes and topics that they now need to probably explore, and not necessarily, be, if they had been previously dismissive of that, in actual fact, to your, the lights have just gone off where I am, to that sort of point of, if this is around retaining employees, if this is around attracting employees, then these are conversations that fundamentally have to be had. So, some of the things that we're trying to do to equip leaders with that, and to equip employees with sort of, I guess, knowing how to navigate that with confidence is we did, I guess, some research internally in the midst of 2020, which was sort of, I guess, initially titled, I guess, our Future of Work survey and research, which now at the moment, sort of only a couple of years in, sort of goes, we have to drop this future of work type context because we're live and we're in it and we've just got to run. But effectively, the purpose of that research was to genuinely understand the data, hear from our employees, not just sort of have anecdotal, insights, but actually draw on the data, because we were going to need that to inform business cases for change effectively. And through that interaction, we were able to pull together a squad of employees that were, cross-functional in their representation, to sort of, I guess, look at some of the themes that were coming out of that research. And effectively, in the same way that, as a digital organization, we sort of run agile squads that sort of go, deep into a particular focus of work, we gave the people the space on that squad to do a design sprint and effectively understand, the different personas that existed in our organization and the themes that were sort of attached to each of those personas, so that we could have a transparent conversation with the organization as to what the research had unveiled, but equally with our executive team and our senior leaders really talk to, you may have some personal views as to what future of work, flexibility, embracing hybrid looks like, but we need to, we've gathered this, perspective from our people, and we now need to work with it to sort of shape future practices internally. And some people, on the call might have seen that we published on LinkedIn our guide to hybrid working on the back of that first research that we did. And what we've been doing, we revisited that last year with a similar sort of survey to sort of see how it was shifting. And we're actually live at the moment with our third survey on, approaches to hybrid working and what's changed, what's evolved, during, this time, because it continues to, I think, operate at pace as to what people are seeking. And as, Tenielle said, like hybrid means, I guess, a mix of all different sorts of, models of work. And so we're really trying to make sure that we keep in touch with our employee base as to, how's it going? Some of the things that we've put in place, and they can be as simple as, an agreement template that teams can step through to have that transparent conversation around, are we a team that can have set days in the office, or are we a team that, is customer facing, and, some of those interactions are going to look different for each of us. So what's going to be important to create, the time together, because that might not be week on week routine in its nature. So we've just tried to, pull together, I guess, some guidance to give employees a sense of, confidence as to how to have these conversations, but by no means downplaying, I guess, the complexity that leaders have right now in navigating this, and to sort of, hopefully move it from what can at times potentially be, as you mentioned before, like a tension that exists in unpacking some of that, to, I guess, try and provide, a constructive way for people to really go, okay, what's important to you? What's important to the team? What's important to the organization? And let's really be clear on, I guess, identifying what those moments are for collaboration. But equally, what are those moments that are spontaneous? Because a lot of the feedback that we get is that, you don't bump into anybody on Zoom. It's all very scheduled, and you click in here and who's going to be there, and but some of the joy that comes from being back in an office, or being on site with a customer, is the people that you bump into, or the conversations that wouldn't have been had otherwise. And so how do we
those incidental
some of those things to sort of encourage that identifying where there's moments to connect is absolutely important.
And look, we've talked a lot about kind of being back into the office in terms of what flexibility means. And I think looking at the poll, we had 80% of the respondents say that, they can pick and choose when and where I work. We've talked a lot about the where in terms of, is it at home? Is it in the office? But the when is also just as important. I mean, gone are the days of that kind of 9 to 5 set time. We're hearing so much about this triple peak day, where we see that activities or peak of activity happens in the workday around 10:30, 2:20, and maybe 10:30 p.m. at night. But this also means that work and life compartmentalization, those lines start to blur a little bit. So, I mean, I guess maybe Adrian, you might be able to help on this one. But how do you guys? How do you look at prioritizing mental health and well-being and balancing that in a world where those lines are becoming more and more blurred?
Yeah, there's no doubt that there's going to be disciplines in terms of a person taking a level of ownership over what works well for them. And that's going to require a level of curiosity initially in how varied your experience could be, what feels right for me, and to then not have to, for instance, land on and believe that firmly quickly, even though we might have, and human beings have, a need for certainty, but instead to also maintain a level of curiosity and openness about how you might be surprised at what works for you that you might not have thought does. But beyond that sort of self-exploration and truly experimentation, it's to be open in sharing your experience so that people can understand what works well for you, what do you believe in terms of experimentation is not working well. Sharing your needs not only is it important for that to create the opportunity to create win-win, but it means that there's a social learning opportunity where others can benefit from your experiments and insights and consider, okay, with that in mind, what might work for me and what do I not feel is actually right for me. So that's, one quick lens that I'll put on it, but I'll hit the pause button and see if you wanted to follow up with anything before I might continue on.
No, Tenielle, were there any insights from your experience around this?
Yeah, I think, and we did release a piece of research in the past couple of months, and it was really kind of moving from always connected to omni-connected, and that's where you control when you are connected at what points in time. So it's not about always being on, but it's how do you create experiences where you can forge relationships, both personally and at work, and that impact and grow your career. I think I mentioned it earlier, and Jackie definitely stepped into it, around like being in the office and creating those experiences is critical. I did see on the chats some questions around the loss of incidental learning for early career professionals. If we take that, we don't need to always be on. We don't need to work 9 to 5. We have omni-connected experiences and we design for those, and we as individuals drive those, and our organizational culture can absolutely expand on that. If I kind of take that early career professional question, it's absolutely what we're seeing is that there, and I think Adrian might have mentioned it, you only get to learn when you're invited to a Zoom or a team meeting for early career professionals, right, during COVID. Certainly in our organisation, we've had a lot of analysts start straight out of university. They've never been in an office environment. And so navigating that and really, you know, how do I operate in like a work environment? How do I learn by overhearing and just observing behaviors and interactions? Where's my water cooler conversation? That is all stuff we are looking at, because it is something that our teams have lost. So how do we create that opportunity when, again, very purposeful interactions when people come into the office, so that they can kind of expand that learning. I know I kind of went off the 9 to 5, but I really wanted to get that point, because we have seen it, and we are designing for that and looking at it.
It's a really interesting one, because there has been a lot of feedback around the challenges, especially for some more junior staff, around how do you help them grow and how do you provide them with the mentorship that they need in environments like this. I mean, I know you said you're testing a few things, but there are any things that you've tested that you think have worked a little bit, Tenielle, that you could share with us in terms of how your business or how businesses should look at catering for staff development?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it really does come back to the vote, almost like when are people in the office, and how do we create, again, and it sounds consulting, and I don't want it to sound consulting, but what are those purposeful experiences where people can, you know, our younger team members, our early career professionals can be invited into meetings and observe, right? Not just by a team meeting, because you're only going to learn what you learn being invited to a team meeting, not through observation. So it's super hard, right? Because we need to work out what are the tasks and activities we can do at home that are that don't need interaction, that don't need observation. And this is absolutely the hybrid of the flexibility policy, right? Not 100% at home, because we know that, you know, even from a mental health and wellbeing perspective, that's been super hard for people over the last couple of years. 100% in the office, that's kind of like, you know, the 360 is just too hard, right? But what is that balance in between? So some of the testing for us is about, you know, pulling people into meetings from an observation perspective, you know, coaching, unfortunately, because we never really had to do that, but we do have to catch up, just to observe and listen, look at how people move around an office, look at how people interact, you know, look at how people dress, like in an office. It's very different, right? There are things that we need to learn and grow from. So some of that testing, defining what is a purposeful reason for coming into the office, that is absolutely, if you define the purpose, you kind of describe the experiences, you create the excitement, people coming back in for those days, it's easier than kind of saying, well, everyone needs to be here on a Tuesday, no matter what, for example.
Yeah. I think so. Would you agree, Jackie? Is that?
Yeah. Oh, look, absolutely. I think, you know, it's, you start to, I think, you run the risk, I think, sometimes where you do kind of go, we'll define the moments to collaborate, and then we'll define the work that can be completed in isolation, because it all naturally makes sense. And you know that you sort of structure your own time in that way a lot as well. But when you start to sort of see, I think, some of the work be performed that hasn't necessarily had the benefit of peer review or somebody else sort of going, I've overheard you having that conversation with a customer, and I actually think you're an appropriate follow-up, or, you know, leading moment with them in the future could look like this. We're starting to see now, I guess, that isolation come through a little bit, of where they haven't, because we've been probably good at defining what can be performed on their own. You then start to see, you know, the conversion of that, and actually where they would benefit, you know, to Tenielle's point of had they observed, you know, a more experienced person, you know, deliver that differently, what would they have changed? And so, you know, I think I was only recently having this conversation with my team, you know, around how we have been successful in, you know, coming up with meetings face to face of where we do want to collaborate and design. But actually, we probably now need to start carving out more time for, I just want to sit next to you and, you know, go about our day next to each other, to then have those, what do I overhear? What do, you know, I suddenly learn about or just sort of have access to that, you know, without these prescriptive moments that we're sort of talking about, that you're not seeding any of these insights that I think we've had the benefit of historically.
Guys, we've got some really great audience questions coming in, so I'm going to jump into them. But before I do, there is another poll for our audience. The poll is, what do you think the work week of the future will look like in 10 years' time? So love to hear from you all, so please get involved. And a couple of questions from the audience going back to the kind of that win-win piece that you spoke about, Adrian. You know, we'd love to hear from you in terms of how do you manage that? How do you, you know, how often do we kind of have to find that degree of compromise across the organisation without kind of, you know, compromising on the impact and the culture of the organisation, if that kind of makes sense?
Yeah, well, look, it's true that we've got compromise, we've got cooperation, collaboration. We want to create a space that really invites the curiosity, openness, sharing of ideas. But I'm sure people joining have had that experience where lots of consultation and then decision by committee can have its own consequences that can be, sometimes things happen too slowly, sometimes compromise does dilute the potential impact. So this is where we still need to realize that leaders have a role as decision makers. And I think the point is that we're moving from a default position where leaders essentially say, this is how we do things, toe the line, to a much more fluid, flexible, open, where we can actually put points of view forward to look at problems and look at opportunities, to share ideas. And then with that insight, with the understanding of the diversity that comes through and some emergent themes, leaders still have a role to be decisive, but hopefully they can reflect back in that decision-making process. Here's what came in, here's why this particular position is the position that we're going to take, and to provide that clarity and to then engage in that role of leadership to draw people along to follow that clear decision and path that has been set forward. However clear that can be, of course, given how uncertain things can be in many areas as well. So hopefully that helps bring that win-win together. And I think the only other thing I want to point out is that just because we can do things in different ways doesn't mean we necessarily should. I mean, even looking at the individual's way of working, knowing that the work-life blurred lines have an impact on people, we do need to step back and understand, well, if I can work in this way, is it actually providing for me the best solution? So on the other side of that, some proper mindfulness and thoughtfulness is going to be important. And I just really want to quickly say the incidental learning piece that you mentioned, let's look at the other side of the career and generational spectrum to realize that this is an important place for other workers that have been around to share the tacit knowledge, that lived experience, to allow that mentorship to cascade down. So this truly is relevant across the whole career spectrum.
Yeah, 100%. And we've spoken a lot about kind of leaders and their roles in kind of being able to enable this. What reflections and I guess potential changes have you had to make to your leadership practices to adapt to this new environment? I might start with yourself, Jackie.
Sure. Look, quite a few, to be honest. I think, you know, our sort of, when we were coming up with our people strategy and the like, you know, since COVID hit, has really amplified the focus on, you know, what we need to be doing with leaders to support them, to build their capability, to just create space for their development, because, you know, like I said before, I don't think it's ever been a more complex time to actually be a leader. So we have a number of different, you know, competency frameworks that you know, we hold senior leaders to, you know, people leaders, individuals, technical competencies as well. But what we've been really doing is revisiting, you know, the currency of those. You know, quite often they can be, you know, generic in nature, because, you know, the competencies that a leader needs to have aren't necessarily unique, you know, to every environment. They're quite transferable. But where we've probably shifted, you know, some of the emphasis is around, you know, where we've always tried to talk to sort of, you know, how we might foster an environment for collaboration and inclusion and things like that. How have we shifted that more to, I guess, an expectation around creating psychologically safe, you know, environments? And, you know, some of the things that we've had to do, you know, in order to support that is we've been, you know, I've worked with Adrian and his company over the past couple of years around our focus on well-being in general, and, you know, how do we make sure that leaders actually have, you know, some things in their toolkit and some knowledge to actually discuss well-being and understand sort of the different components there. We've been looking at, and through that, we've had, you know, well-being champions created throughout the organisation. And, you know, one of the members of our people and culture team has had sort of a wellness focus, you know, put to their role, which a lot of other organizations are doing more and more, is carving out sort of, you know, whether it's wellness or even sort of, you know, having a in-house psychologist and things like that. I think it depends on, you know, the size and the scale of the organization. But we've also been investing in mental health first aid training. You know, we've done a good job historically of having, you know, first aid for sort of the physical, you know, ailments. You know, one of the things that we've felt that has really required, I guess, you know, technical training and space to actually learn is, if you do anticipate that there are people that might not be coping, or that, you know, burnout has been, you know, a particular issue, or just, you know, the world can seem like a heavy place at the moment, is equipping our leaders with, you know, some access to actual frameworks and structures and accreditation around mental health first aid. But then I think the other thing that's been important for leaders is actually finding, you know, opportunities for them as a cohort to come together and talk about how challenging it is to be a leader right now, and the support that they feel that they need. So creating some spaces where that can, you know, be discussed openly, and that there is an ability to be vulnerable, I guess, in that exchange, and then for there to be, I guess, appropriate follow-up to, okay, well, thanks for that share, but what now? Like, how can we help them?
Yeah. Anything from yourself, Adrian or Tenielle, to add to that?
I mean, as on a personal level, as a leader, having to adapt in this new world has been, it's been interesting, right? Like, we've had to flex to, flexibility now is hyper-personalized. And if you can't hyper-personalize to an extent, that's where we start to see mental health issues, attrition, retention. So whilst we have a framework in place, as a leader, adapting that framework to the individual circumstances has been super important for myself and my team and my HR business partner. So I would say flexibility as a leader, working in the grey and the ambiguity of frameworks and policies. HR might hurt, kill me for that one, that we've had to do that, right? And at the end of the day, I mean, for us, we are a people business. And, you know, my team are my extended family, and we've certainly done a lot over the last 2 years to really cultivate that that sense of belonging and well-being, and putting that mental health first. Sure, it gets really busy, it gets really stressful. I mean, we are a consulting team. It can be super challenging, but at the end of the day, human first always, right? And if we always take that approach when we make decisions and we lead our people through some of the tough times we've had, I think we come out better on the other end as leaders.
Love it. Human first. Adrian?
Looking at the time, do you have time for me to say much?
I've got 2 more minutes. I know I could continue this conversation forever. Hey, look.
Yeah, I don't want to be repetitive, so let's just see if any final closing words, right?
Well, look, there's lots of great questions coming through, so unfortunately we won't be able to get through to them all today, but I did ask this to the audience and I'll ask it to you guys. What do you think the work week of the future will look like? Is hybrid here to stay? Will physical offices disappear? Quick 20-second summary from all of you. I'll start with you, Adrian.
I think hybrid will continue into the future. Obviously, it'll be easier for some than others. I saw in the chat channel, there are certain, and we shouldn't forget that, there are certain types of work that don't have this kind of luxury, if you call it that. But I do think that this model will continue to find its opportunities and its challenges, and it will be a different world into the future because of it. But I think it can be a better one if we're really thoughtful about this transition and innovation over time.
Definitely here to stay. I think workplaces in some way, shape or form are here to stay. So Jackie said earlier, you know, that's not future of work, like we're doing it now, and it is. It's the future is now, and you know, looking at workplace and the models in which we design and experiment around for flexibility, for hybrid working, physical workspaces. We will always adapt and learn. And I think that, like, you know, we are now in a generation where experimentation is key in our businesses and innovation is key. So continuing to learn from that, we'll absolutely do it. Do I think that there is always going to be a place for workplace? Yes.
Yeah. No, I'd echo what you're both saying. And I actually think, you know, the things that we'll need to start really sort of being ready for more so as sort of like, what's the construct of work? You know, employees working, you know, for multiple employers is probably more where we're heading towards, you know, and can I even call them employees, you know, like the shift into gig working, the shift into, you know, I guess having more automation and, you know, infrastructure that is completely different to what we have right now. So, you know, hybrid is almost yesterday in so much of what we're talking about. So I actually think the way that roles will be designed and the actual relationship between people and workplaces is fundamentally where we're going to see a huge amount of disruption.
Fantastic. Well, look, I am pressed for time. I'm 1 minute over, but I want to say a big thank you, Adrian, Jackie, and Tenielle, for your time today and for your amazing insights. We have recorded this session, so we will send it out shortly to all attendees. And if you'd like to share it with anyone, please feel free to forward it on. And stay in touch with us. We've got a lot of upcoming events, and follow us on all the regular socials. And if anyone's interested in learning more about the research, please visit the link that's going to be shared on the chat to our latest report, The Office Clash. And again, thank you so much, panel, for your amazing time. Great insights.
Thank you.